The November wind cut through Vincent Sterling's threadbare coat like a blade as he knelt at the entrance of the dugout he now called home, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the Montana mountains. He had been a man of property once, with a ranch house and cattle that grazed across acres of grassland. But a single fire had taken everything from him in the span of an hour, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and a will to survive that grew thinner with each passing day. The dugout was barely more than a cave carved into the hillside, its earthen walls seeping moisture and cold, but it kept the worst of the wind away. And for that, he supposed he should be grateful. Vincent was 27 years old, and he felt like an old man. The fire had happened in late September, just as the weather was turning, and he had spent the last 6 weeks scraping by on what little work he could find in Bannack, Montana. The town was still recovering from its gold rush days, and while it was not as wild as it had been in the early 1860s, it still had enough roughness around the edges to make survival difficult for a man with nothing. He had managed to earn a few dollars here and there, enough to buy cornmeal and beans, but winter was coming fast, and he knew the dugout would not keep him alive through the Montana cold. He was heating water over a small fire when he heard the sound of hoofbeats approaching. Vincent tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the knife at his belt. Few people came out this way, and those who did usually had business that was not the friendly sort. But as the rider came into view, he relaxed slightly. It was a woman, sitting tall in the saddle, her dark hair pulled back in a practical braid. She wore men's trousers and a heavy wool coat, and she handled her horse with the ease of someone who had been riding since childhood. She pulled up a few yards from the dugout and looked down at him with eyes that were both curious and cautious. "Are you Vincent Sterling?" she asked, her voice clear and direct. Vincent stood slowly, brushing the dirt from his knees. "I am. Who is asking?" "My name is Grace Lawson," she said, swinging down from the saddle with practiced ease. "I heard in town that you lost your place, that you are living out here." Vincent felt heat rise in his face, a mixture of shame and defensiveness. "Word travels fast." "Small town," Grace said simply. She looked at the dugout, and he saw something like sympathy cross her face. "My father had a place like this when we first came to Montana. That was back in '63. He said it saved his life that first winter, but he also said it nearly drove him mad." "I am working on something better," Vincent said, though even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. He had no resources, no way to build anything before the snow came. Grace studied him for a long moment, and he found himself studying her in return. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with softness or delicacy. Her face was strong, with high cheekbones and a determined jaw, and her eyes were the color of storm clouds. He guessed she was in her mid-20s, old enough to have seen hardship but young enough to still have hope in her expression. "I have a proposition for you," Grace said finally. "I have timber on my land, good timber, and I have been needing to clear some of it anyway. I also have tools and some experience raising cabins. My father taught me before he died. What I do not have is another pair of hands strong enough to do the heavy lifting." Vincent frowned, not quite understanding. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I will help you raise a cabin before the snow comes if you are willing to work for it. We would need to move fast. The weather will not wait for us. But if we start tomorrow and work steady, we could have walls and a roof up in 3 weeks, maybe 4. Vincent stared at her, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. "Why would you do that? You do not even know me." Grace's expression softened slightly. "I know what it is like to have nothing. My father and I came here with less than you have now. People helped us when they did not have to, and he always said we had to pay that kindness forward. Besides," she added, a hint of practicality entering her tone. "I could use the help clearing my land. You would be doing me a favor, too." Vincent felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight and hard since the fire. "I do not know what to say. Say you will meet me at first light tomorrow at my place. It is about 3 miles north of here, the only cabin with a red door. You cannot miss it." Grace moved back to her horse and mounted with the same fluid grace she had shown dismounting. "Bring whatever tools you have, though I am guessing that is not much. I have most of what we will need." "Miss Lawson," Vincent called out as she turned her horse. "Thank you." Grace looked back at him, and for the first time she smiled. It transformed her face, making her look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Thank you when we have walls up and a fire going inside. That is when you will really mean it." She rode off into the gathering darkness, and Vincent stood watching until the sound of hoofbeats faded away. Then he went back into the dugout, but for the first time in weeks, he did not feel the crushing weight of despair. He felt something else, something that might have been hope. He barely slept that night, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. He had built cabins before, back when he was younger and helping his father establish their ranch. He knew the work would be brutal, especially with only 2 people, but if Grace was as capable as she seemed, they might actually pull it off. The question that kept nagging at him was why. Why would a woman he had never met offer to help him like this? In his experience, people did not do things out of pure kindness, not in the West where survival was hard enough without taking on someone else's burdens. But when he rode up to Grace's cabin the next morning on the half-lame horse he had managed to keep after the fire, all his suspicions faded. The cabin was small but well built, with that distinctive red door she had mentioned. Behind it, he could see a good-sized clearing, and beyond that, thick stands of pine and Douglas fir. Grace was already outside, wearing the same practical clothes from the night before, and she had laid out an impressive array of tools. Axes, saws, and adze, a draw knife, and various other implements he recognized from his building days. "You came," she said, and he detected a note of relief in her voice that told him she had not been entirely certain he would show up. "Of course I came," Vincent said, dismounting. "A man would be a fool to turn down an offer like yours." Grace nodded. "All business now. Then let us get started. I have been scouting timber for the last few days, and I have found some good trees about a half-mile in. We will need to fell them, limb them, and drag them back here. Once we have enough logs, we will start notching and stacking. I am thinking we make your cabin about 16 by 20 feet. That will give you a decent living space and a separate area for sleeping." Vincent felt overwhelmed by her competence and organization. "You have thought this through." "I do not do things halfway," Grace said simply. She handed him one of the axes, a well-maintained tool with a sharp blade. "Can you still swing one of these?" In answer, Vincent took the axe and made a few practice swings, feeling the familiar weight and balance. His muscles remembered the motion even if they were weaker than they had once been from weeks of poor eating and harder living. "I can manage." "Good. Then let us go find your walls." They worked through that first day with an intensity that surprised Vincent. Grace was not just competent. She was skilled, moving through the forest with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. She showed him which trees to take and which to leave, explaining the importance of straight grain and minimal knots. They felled 6 trees that first day, good-sized pines that would make solid logs, and by the time the sun was setting, Vincent's hands were blistered and his back was screaming, but he felt more alive than he had in months. Grace noticed him wincing as he tried to flex his fingers. "Come inside. I have salve for those blisters." Her cabin was cozy and surprisingly feminine for a woman who worked like a lumberjack. There were curtains at the windows, a colorful quilt on the bed, and dried flowers hanging from the rafters. Grace gestured for him to sit at the small table while she retrieved a tin of salve from a shelf. "Give me your hands," she said, and when he held them out, she took them in her own and began applying the salve with gentle, practiced movements. Her hands were calloused like his, but they were also warm and surprisingly soft. Vincent found himself very aware of her closeness, the faint scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to her hair. "You are good at this," he said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "The building, I mean." "Your father taught you well." Grace's hands stilled for a moment. "He did not have a choice. My mother died when I was young, and it was just the two of us. He said he could either teach me to be helpless or teach me to survive. He chose survival. I am sorry about your mother." "It was a long time ago." Grace finished with his hands and stepped back. "You should stay for supper. It is nothing fancy, just stew, but you need to keep your strength up if we are going to maintain this pace." Vincent knew he should probably decline, should maintain some kind of professional distance, but the smell of the stew was intoxicating after weeks of cornmeal mush, and more than that, he found he did not want to leave her company. "If you are sure it is not an imposition." "I offered, did I not?" They ate together as the last light faded from the sky, and Vincent found himself talking more than he had in months. He told her about the fire, about watching everything he had worked for go up in flames. He told her about the hopelessness of those first weeks, the way each day in the dugout had felt like a slow death. Grace listened without interruption, her gray eyes steady and understanding. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "My father used to say that fire was the West's way of reminding us that nothing is permanent, that we are all just borrowing this land for a little while." It did not make losing things any easier, but it helped me remember that what matters is not what we own but what we carry inside us. "That is a good way to think about it," Vincent said. "Though I confess right now, I would trade a lot of what I carry inside me for a solid roof and 4 walls." Grace laughed, a warm sound that filled the small cabin. "Well then, we had better get you that roof and those walls. Finish your stew and get some rest. Tomorrow will be even harder than today." She was right. The next day was harder, and the day after that was harder still. They fell into a rhythm, meeting at dawn and working until dusk, with only brief breaks for water and a quick meal at midday. They felled trees, stripped bark, dragged logs. Vincent's body, soft from weeks of inactivity, hardened again. His blisters became calluses, and his muscles stopped screaming and started simply aching in a dull, constant way that he almost welcomed, because it meant he was building something, creating something, moving forward instead of just surviving. As they worked, he learned more about Grace. She was 24, 3 years younger than him. She had been born in St. Louis but had no memory of it, having come west with her parents when she was just a baby. Her father had been a carpenter by trade, and he had taught her everything he knew before dying of pneumonia 2 winters ago. She had been running this place alone ever since, taking on odd jobs in town, selling timber when she could, and somehow managing to hold onto her independence in a world that was not kind to women on their own. "You ever think about leaving?" Vincent asked one afternoon as they were notching logs. "Going back east where life might be easier." Grace looked at him like he had suggested she sprout wings and fly. "This is my home. My father is buried on that hill behind the cabin. Why would I leave?" I did not mean any offense. "I just know it must be hard, doing this alone." "Everything worth doing is hard," Grace said, her tone matter of fact. "That does not mean we should stop doing it." By the end of the first week, they had enough logs for the walls. Grace had chosen the site for Vincent's cabin carefully. a spot about a quarter-mile from her own place, on high enough ground to avoid flooding but sheltered from the worst of the wind by a stand of trees. They spent 2 days preparing the foundation, laying down flat stones to keep the logs off the ground and prevent rot. Then came the real work, raising the walls. The first few logs went up relatively easily, but as the walls grew higher, each log became a battle. They used ropes and improvised a pulley system, with Grace climbing up to guide the logs into place while Vincent hauled from below. It was dangerous work, and more than once Vincent's heart stopped as Grace balanced on the rising walls, seemingly unconcerned about the drop below her. "You are going to give me gray hair," he called up to her during one particularly precarious moment. Grace grinned down at him. "I have been doing this since I was 15. I have not fallen yet. There is always a first time. Then I suppose you had better catch me." The banter between them had become easy and natural, though Vincent tried not to think too hard about what that might mean. Grace was helping him out of kindness, maybe out of loneliness too, but that did not mean she had any interest in him beyond that. Still, he could not help noticing the way her face lit up when he made her laugh, or the way she sometimes looked at him when she thought he was not paying attention, her expression thoughtful and almost tender. They were halfway through the second week when the first snow came. It was light, just flurries that melted as soon as they hit the ground, but it was a warning. Winter was breathing down their necks, and they were racing against time. They began working longer hours, starting before dawn and continuing by lantern light after dark. Vincent moved out of the dugout and started sleeping in Grace's barn, which was warmer and closer to the work site. She brought him blankets and hot coffee in the mornings, and they would stand together in the cold darkness, breath misting in the air, before beginning another brutal day. It was during one of these early mornings that Vincent finally worked up the courage to ask the question that had been bothering him since the beginning. "Grace, why are you really doing this? And please do not tell me it is just about clearing your land or paying forward kindness. I need to understand." Grace was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the half-built cabin. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "After my father died, I thought I would be all right on my own. I am strong, I am capable, I know how to do things. But there is a difference between surviving and living, and I had started to forget what living felt like. Then I heard about you, about a man living in a dugout, and I thought maybe helping you would help me remember. Does that make sense?" Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee he was holding. "It makes perfect sense." "There is more," Grace said, still not looking at him. "I have been alone for 2 years, and I have told myself I prefer it that way. That I am better off not depending on anyone. But working with you these past weeks, I have realized how much I have missed having someone to talk to, someone to share the burden with. Even if this is just temporary, even if you leave after the cabin is done, it has reminded me what it feels like to not be alone." Vincent set down his coffee and turned to face her fully. "What makes you think I would leave?" Grace finally met his eyes, and in the pre-dawn light, he could see vulnerability there that she usually kept hidden. "Because people do. They move on, they find better opportunities, they get tired of the hard life. My father and I, we had people help us and then disappear. That is just how it is." "That is not how I am," Vincent said firmly. "Grace, you have given me more than just help with a cabin. You have given me back my life, my hope. I am not going anywhere unless you want me to." Something flickered in Grace's eyes, something that looked like hope mixed with fear. "Do not make promises you cannot keep." "I do not." Vincent reached out and took her hand, feeling the calluses that matched his own. "I know we have not known each other long, but these have been the best weeks I have had in years, not just because of the work, but because of you." Your strength, your kindness, your refusal to let the world break you. I admire you, Grace Lawson, and if you will let me, I would like to be more than just someone you helped." Grace's fingers tightened around his. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think I am falling in love with you," Vincent said, the words coming out in a rush now that he had started. "I know the timing is terrible and I have nothing to offer you except hard work and determination, but I needed you to know. If you do not feel the same way, I will understand and we can just go on as we have been, but I could not keep it inside anymore." For a long moment, Grace just stared at him, and Vincent felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then, slowly, she smiled, and it was like the sun coming up. "You are an idiot, Vincent Sterling." "I know," he said miserably. "No, you do not understand. You are an idiot because I have been half in love with you since the third day we worked together, when you climbed that pine to tie off the rope. And you were grinning like a boy, even though you were clearly terrified of heights. You are an idiot because I have been lying awake at night trying to figure out how to tell you without scaring you off. You are an idiot because you beat me to it." Vincent felt like he could not breathe. "You are in love with me." "Half in love," Grace corrected, but she was still smiling. "Though I suspect the other half is not far behind." He kissed her then, unable to stop himself, and she kissed him back with a fierceness that made his head spin. Her lips were cold from the morning air, but they warmed quickly, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "We should probably get to work," Grace said, but she made no move to step away from him. "Probably," Vincent agreed, pulling her closer instead. They did eventually get to work, but everything felt different now. The labor was still back-breaking, but it felt lighter somehow, infused with a joy that had not been there before. They stole moments throughout the day, quick kisses when they took water breaks, hands touching as they worked side by side. Vincent caught himself grinning for no reason, and more than once he looked over to find Grace watching him with a soft expression that made his heart skip. The walls went up faster after that, fueled by a new sense of urgency. They were not just building a cabin anymore, they were building a future. They talked as they worked, planning and dreaming in a way that Vincent would have thought impossible just weeks before. Grace wanted to expand her timber business, to bring in more income so they could save for improvements. Vincent wanted to start over with cattle, maybe just a few at first, building slowly toward something sustainable. "We could combine our land," Grace said one evening as they were fitting the roof beams. "Your property and mine, they are adjacent. Together, we would have enough space for a decent herd and plenty of timber." "Our land," Vincent said, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." "Do not get ahead of yourself," Grace teased, but her eyes were warm. "You have not even asked me properly. Give me time. I am building a cabin first, remember." The roof went on in sections. Hand-split shingles that Grace had been making in her spare time for the past year, originally intending them for repairs to her own cabin. She insisted Vincent use them instead, over his protests. "I can make more," she said. "Besides, I like the idea of part of me being in your cabin." "Our cabin," she corrected with a smile. They were working on the door frame when the second snow came, this time heavier and more persistent. The flakes were large and wet, accumulating on the ground and on the unfinished cabin. Vincent and Grace worked through it, determined to get the structure weather-tight before the real cold set in. Their fingers went numb and their clothes grew damp, but they kept going, driven by necessity and by the knowledge that they were almost done. It was Grace who hammered in the final shingle, standing on the roof in the falling snow like some kind of warrior queen. She climbed down carefully, and Vincent caught her at the bottom, swinging her around in a circle despite his exhausted muscles. "We did it," he said, laughing. We actually did it. We have walls and a roof, Grace said, her practical nature asserting itself even as she laughed with him. But we still need a door, windows, a chimney, a floor. Details, Vincent said, kissing her snow-dusted face. We have the important parts. I can sleep here tonight without freezing to death. Everything else we can do as we go. They stood there in the snow, holding each other, and Vincent felt a completeness he had not experienced in his entire life. This woman, this fierce, capable, beautiful woman, had saved him in every way a person could be saved. She had given him shelter and hope and love, and he was determined to spend the rest of his life being worthy of those gifts. Over the next few days, they finished the essentials. Vincent built a door from rough-cut planks, and Grace helped him install it with iron hinges she had been saving. They constructed a simple stone fireplace and chimney, using river rock and mud mortar. It was not pretty, but it would work. For windows, they used oiled paper stretched over frames, which would let in light while keeping out the worst of the cold. The floor was just packed dirt for now, but Vincent planned to lay proper boards in the spring. When it was finally done, Grace brought over a basket with bread, cheese, and a bottle of whiskey she said her father had been saving for a special occasion. They sat by Vincent's new fireplace, watching the flames dance while the snow continued to fall outside, and toasted to new beginnings. "This is the finest home I have ever had," Vincent said, meaning it. The cabin was small and rough, but it was solid, and more importantly, it represented survival and hope and the beginning of something new. "You built a good home," Grace said. "We built a good home." Vincent set down his cup and turned to her. "Grace, I know we have not known each other long, just a few weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you, a real life, not just structures but a future. Will you marry me?" Grace set down her own cup, her expression suddenly serious. "Are you asking because you love me or because you think you owe me?" "I am asking because I cannot imagine my life without you in it," Vincent said. "Because when I think about the future, you are in every plan, every dream, every hope I have. I know I do not have much to offer right now, just this cabin and a lot of determination, but I swear to you I will spend every day trying to give you the life you deserve." Tears were sliding down Grace's cheeks now, catching the firelight. "You already have given me that life. You have given me partnership and equality and someone who sees me as an equal, not just a woman to be protected or provided for. Do you know how rare that is? Then, is that a yes?" Grace laughed through her tears. "Yes, you fool. Yes, I will marry you." They were married in Bannack 3 weeks later on a cold December day with snow piled high on the streets. The ceremony was simple, performed by a traveling preacher who happened to be passing through. Grace wore a dress she had made herself from blue wool, and Vincent wore the only suit he owned, borrowed from a kind shopkeeper in town who had heard their story. The witnesses were a handful of townspeople who had come to respect Grace for her independence and Vincent for his determination to rebuild his life. After the ceremony, they rode back to the cabin together, and Vincent carried Grace over the threshold, both of them laughing at the absurdity and rightness of it. That night, as they lay together in the bed they had built against one wall, listening to the wind howl outside their solid walls, Vincent felt a peace he had not known existed. "I was thinking," Grace said, her head resting on his chest, "we should expand this cabin in the spring. Add another room, maybe 2. We are going to need the space." "Are we?" Vincent asked, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back. "Well, if things go as I hope, yes. I want children, Vincent. I want a family. Is that something you want too?" Vincent tightened his arms around her. "I want everything with you. Children, a growing ranch, a long life of working side by side, all of it." "Good," Grace said, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Then we had better get started." The winter was hard, as Montana winters always were, but they faced it together. Vincent spent his days cutting firewood, repairing his cabin, and helping Grace with her property. She taught him more about timber management, and he shared what he knew about ranching and animal husbandry. They were building something together, not just structures but knowledge and skills and a partnership that grew stronger with each passing day. In late January, a warm spell allowed them to make the trip to Vincent's old property. He had been avoiding it, not wanting to face the ruins of what he had lost, but Grace insisted it was time. When they arrived, Vincent was struck by how small the burned remnants looked. In his memory, the ranch house had been grand, but now he saw it was just a modest building, no bigger than what they were creating together. "We should salvage what we can," Grace said practically, already walking through the ruins. "These nails can be reused. Some of this timber is still good. And look, your forge survived." Vincent had forgotten about the small blacksmith forge he had built behind the house. It was damaged but salvageable, and seeing it sparked an idea. "I could repair that, set it up at the cabin. We could do our own metalwork, save money on tools and repairs." "That is a good idea," Grace said. She turned to him, her expression gentle. "Does it hurt seeing this?" Vincent looked around at the blackened wood and snow-covered rubble. "Not as much as I thought it would. This was my past, but it is not my future. My future is with you, in the cabin we built together." They spent the day salvaging what they could, loading tools and usable materials onto a borrowed wagon. As they were preparing to leave, Vincent took one last look at the property. "I think I will sell this land in the spring. Use the money to buy cattle." "Are you sure? You could rebuild here." Vincent shook his head. "This place is too full of ghosts. I want to start fresh, build something new. Our land, remember?" Grace smiled and took his hand. "Our land." By February, they knew Grace was pregnant. She had been feeling ill in the mornings, and when the pattern continued for more than a week, they both understood what it meant. Vincent was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. Grace was calmer, though he caught her sometimes with her hand resting on her still flat stomach, a dreamy expression on her face. "We really do need to expand the cabin now," she said one evening. "A baby will need space." "I will start as soon as the weather breaks," Vincent promised. "We will add 2 rooms, maybe 3. A proper bedroom for us, a nursery, and a room for storage or another child later on." "Another child?" Grace raised an eyebrow. "Let me get through this one first." But she was smiling, and Vincent knew she wanted the same thing he did. A house full of children. A home full of life and love and laughter. The spring came slowly, reluctantly, but when it finally arrived, it brought with it an explosion of activity. Vincent sold his old property to a newcomer from the east, a young man with dreams and determination that reminded Vincent of himself. The money from the sale was enough to buy 20 head of cattle and still have some left over for improvements and supplies. They began the cabin expansion as soon as the ground thawed enough to dig. This time, the work went faster because Vincent knew what he was doing and because they had help. Word had spread about their story, about the woman who had helped a man living in a dugout raise a cabin before snow, and about the love that had grown between them. Several neighbors showed up unannounced to lend a hand, bringing food and tools and labor. It was the way of the West, the unspoken understanding that survival depended on community. By late May, the expanded cabin was complete. It was not fancy, but it was spacious and solid, with glass windows that Vincent had ordered from a catalog and real wooden floors throughout. Grace had sewn curtains for every window, and together they had built furniture. A proper bed frame, a table large enough for a family, chairs and benches and shelves. The nursery was painted a soft yellow, the color of sunshine, and Grace had made quilts and blankets in preparation for the baby's arrival. The cattle thrived on their combined land, and Vincent began to see the possibility of a real future in ranching. He was not trying to rebuild what he had lost. He was creating something better, something built on partnership and shared dreams rather than solitary ambition. In late July, on a hot afternoon when the mountains shimmered in the distance, Grace went into labor. Vincent had arranged for a midwife from town to be on call, and he rode like a demon to fetch her, his heart in his throat the entire way. By the time they returned, Grace's labor was well advanced, and the midwife took over with calm efficiency. Vincent was banished to the main room, where he paced and worried and prayed to a God he was not sure he believed in. He heard Grace cry out several times, and each sound was like a knife to his heart. But mixed with the cries were the midwife's encouraging words, and after what felt like an eternity but was actually less than 6 hours, he heard a new sound, the thin, reedy wail of a newborn. The midwife emerged a few minutes later, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Sterling, a healthy boy. And your wife is tired but well." Vincent barely heard the last part. He rushed into the bedroom and found Grace propped up against pillows, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny bundle, a red-faced baby with a surprising amount of dark hair. "Meet your son," Grace said, her voice hoarse but full of joy. "What should we name him?" Vincent sat carefully on the edge of the bed, hardly daring to breathe as he looked at the tiny person they had created. "I was thinking, if you like it, we could name him Thomas after your father. He brought you west and you saved me. Seems fitting that his name should continue." Tears spilled down Grace's cheeks. "Thomas Sterling, I love it." Vincent reached out and gently touched his son's impossibly small hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his thumb with a grip that was surprisingly strong, and Vincent felt something inside him click into place. This was what life was about. Not property or possessions, not even just love, but this, the creation of family, the building of a future one moment at a time. The first year of Thomas's life was exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Vincent had not known it was possible to be so tired and so happy at the same time. Grace recovered quickly from the birth and was soon back to work, though Vincent insisted she take it easier than before. They hired a teenage girl from town to help with the baby and the house, which freed Grace to continue her timber work and Vincent to focus on the cattle. The ranch, as they had started calling their combined property, began to prosper. The cattle multiplied, and Vincent discovered he had a knack for breeding and selecting stock. Grace's timber business grew as well, and between the two enterprises, they were soon making more money than either of them had ever seen. But the prosperity did not change them. They still worked side by side whenever possible. They still sat together by the fire in the evenings, planning and dreaming. And they still looked at each other with the same wonder and love that had bloomed during those frantic weeks of cabin raising. When Thomas was 14 months old, Grace told Vincent she was pregnant again. This time, the news did not come with fear, only joy. They knew what to expect now, and they were ready. Vincent added another room to the cabin, and Grace sewed more blankets and tiny clothes. Their daughter was born in early spring, arriving faster than Thomas had, as if she could not wait to join the world. They named her Martha after Vincent's mother, and she was everything Thomas was not. Loud where he was quiet, demanding where he was patient, fiery where he was calm. Vincent loved her instantly and completely. The years began to roll by with increasing speed. Thomas learned to walk and talk and ride. Martha followed her brother everywhere, chattering constantly and getting into everything. Grace and Vincent added yet another room to the cabin and then another, until the original structure was barely recognizable. It had become a proper ranch house, sprawling and comfortable, filled with the sounds of children and life. They had 2 more children over the next few years, another son named Samuel, and finally a daughter they called Rose. The ranch continued to grow and they hired help, both for the house and for the land. But no matter how busy they became, Vincent and Grace always made time for each other, stealing moments alone, taking rides into the mountains, sitting together on the porch after the children were asleep. One evening, nearly 10 years after Vincent had been living in that dugout, he and Grace sat together on that porch, watching the sun set over the land they had built together. The cattle were lowing in the distance, and inside the house they could hear their children arguing over some childish dispute. "You remember that first night you came to the dugout?" Vincent asked, taking Grace's hand. "I thought you were crazy, offering to help me like that." Grace laughed. "I thought I was crazy too, but something told me I needed to take the chance, that you were worth the risk." "Best decision you ever made," Vincent teased. "No," Grace said, squeezing his hand. "Best decision we ever made. You decided to trust me, to work with me, to build something together. That was just as important as my decision to help." Vincent looked out at the ranch, at the sturdy buildings and fat cattle and carefully managed forest. But more than that, he looked at the life they had created. 4 healthy children, a partnership built on respect and love, a future that seemed bright and limitless. He thought about that desperate man in the dugout, hopeless and alone, and marveled at how far he had come. "I love you," he said, turning to Grace. "I know I tell you that every day, but I do not think I will ever be able to say it enough. You saved my life, Grace, not just by helping me build that cabin, but by showing me what life could be, what love could be." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder. "You saved me too. I was just existing before you came along, going through the motions. You reminded me what it meant to really live, to have someone to share the burdens and the joys. We saved each other." Inside the house, Rose started crying and they heard Thomas trying to comfort her in his patient way. Martha was singing, off-key as always. Samuel was probably reading. He always had his nose in a book. It was chaos and noise and life, and it was perfect. "We should go in," Grace said, but neither of them moved. They sat there a moment longer, holding hands, watching the stars begin to emerge in the darkening sky. They were not the same people who had built that cabin in a desperate race against winter. They had been shaped and changed by the years, by the work and the children and the life they had created together. But the core of what they had built remained strong: partnership, respect, love. Finally, they rose and went inside, into the warm, noisy house filled with the family they had made. Vincent pulled Grace close for a kiss before they joined the chaos, and she smiled against his lips. "Here is to many more years," she whispered. "Many more years," Vincent agreed. And then they stepped into the noise and the love, ready for whatever came next, knowing that as long as they faced it together, they could handle anything the West threw at them. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Winter snows gave way to spring mud, which gave way to summer heat, which gave way to autumn gold. The children grew. Thomas became a serious young man who loved the cattle as much as his father did. Martha developed her mother's fierce independence and her father's good sense. Samuel remained bookish, but surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for business that served the ranch well. Rose was the baby, spoiled by everyone but sweet-natured and kind. Vincent's hair began to gray at the temples, and Grace developed lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they were happy lines, laugh lines, and when Vincent looked at his wife, he saw the same strong, beautiful woman who had ridden up to his dugout all those years ago and offered him hope. One afternoon, when Thomas was 17 and beginning to take over more of the ranch operations, Vincent and Grace rode out to where the original cabin still stood. They had kept it maintained over the years, using it sometimes for storage or as a place for hired hands to stay. But today, they just sat on their horses and looked at it. "It seems impossible that this was once our whole world," Grace said. "It was enough, though," Vincent replied. "It was shelter and hope and the beginning of everything we have now. Should we tear it down? Build something else in its place?" Vincent shook his head. "No, let us keep it. Someday, when the children have children of their own, they can come here and we can tell them the story about how their grandmother saw a man in need and decided to help. About how their grandfather found love and hope when he thought he had lost everything. About how a simple cabin built in a race against winter became the foundation for all of this." Grace smiled. "I like that idea. Every family should know their stories, where they came from, what their parents overcame." They rode back to the main house as the sun was setting, painting the Montana sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. The ranch sprawled before them, a testament to hard work and partnership and love. Smoke rose from the chimney of the big house, and they could see their children moving around inside, preparing dinner, arguing, laughing, living. Vincent reached over and took Grace's hand as they rode, and she squeezed back. No words were needed. After 10 years together, they could communicate in glances and touches, in the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other completely. That night, after dinner was cleared and the children had scattered to their various activities, Vincent and Grace sat by the fireplace, just as they had done thousands of times before. But this time, Vincent pulled out a small wooden box he had been working on in secret. "What is this?" Grace asked as he handed it to her. "Open it." Inside was a deed, officially combining both properties under both their names in equal partnership. Vincent had been working with a lawyer in town for months to make it happen, to ensure that everything they had built was truly theirs together in the eyes of the law. "Vincent," Grace breathed, tears filling her eyes. "You did not have to do this." "Yes, I did. You were the one who saved me, who helped me build that first cabin, who took a chance on a man with nothing. Everything we have, we built together, and I wanted the papers to reflect that truth. We are partners, Grace. Equal partners. Always have been, always will be." Grace set the box aside and moved into his arms, and Vincent held her close, feeling her tears soak into his shirt. These were good tears, happy tears, and he let her cry them out. "I love you so much," she finally said, "more than I can ever express." "Then do not try to express it. Just live it with me, for all the years we have left, however many that may be." "Deal," Grace said, and kissed him with all the passion and love of that first kiss, all those years ago in the cold dawn light. The years continued to pass. Thomas married a girl from town, a practical young woman who reminded Vincent strongly of Grace. They built their own cabin on the far edge of the ranch, starting their own family and their own story. Martha shocked everyone by going east to study, though she returned after 3 years with a teaching certificate and a determination to educate the children of Montana. Samuel took over the business side of the ranch, expanding their operations and making deals that secured their prosperity for generations. Rose married a rancher from a neighboring property, combining the lands and creating an even larger operation. Through it all, Vincent and Grace remained the heart of the family. They were the ones the children came to with problems, the ones who settled disputes, the ones who held everything together. And through it all, They loved each other with the same intensity as those early days, though it had deepened and matured into something even more powerful. On their 20th anniversary, Vincent took Grace back to the dugout. It was still there, though barely, more a depression in the hillside than anything else now. They sat on the ground where he had once huddled against the cold, and Vincent pulled Grace close. 20 years ago, I was sitting here, thinking my life was over. I had nothing, no hope, no future. And then you came riding up with an impossible offer and a crazy plan. It was not crazy, Grace protested. It worked, did it not? It worked better than I could have ever dreamed. Grace, you are my whole world. You and the family we built, the life we created. I would go through losing everything all over again if it meant ending up here with you. Do not say that, Grace said, but she was smiling. I would rather we just keep what we have. I am quite happy with our life as it is. So am I, Vincent said. So am I. They sat there for a long time, holding each other, remembering and dreaming. The wind blew cold, carrying the scent of snow, and Vincent thought about that desperate race to build a cabin before winter. They had succeeded, but they had built so much more than just a shelter. They had built a life, a family, a legacy. As they rode back to the ranch house, Vincent felt a completeness that transcended words. He had started with nothing, lost everything, and found something better than he had ever imagined possible. The dugout, the cabin, the ranch house, the children, the cattle, the land, all of it mattered. But none of it mattered as much as the woman riding beside him, the woman who had saved him in every way a person could be saved. They had built a cabin before the snow. But more importantly, they had built a love that would last forever, a partnership that had transformed two separate lives into one beautiful, shared story. And as the first snowflakes of another winter began to fall, Vincent knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, just as they always had. That was what truly mattered. Not the walls they had raised or the land they had claimed, but the love they had built, one day at a time, one moment at a time, forever and always. The future stretched before them, full of grandchildren and new adventures and the quiet joy of growing old together. And Vincent Sterling, who had once lived in a dugout with no hope and no future, went to sleep that night in a warm house, surrounded by family, holding the woman he loved, and thought that he was the luckiest man who had ever lived in the Wild West or anywhere else.